Hi, we're Sunset Team 6, and today we're going to be talking to you about tunnel vision. In today's world, many companies are always looking at their current situation and the situation they would rather be in. This is perfectly normal, as companies are looking for an objective to shoot for. However, as companies begin to figure out a path towards that objective, some of them may end up sticking to that one path without really considering other options available. This can be due to stubbornness or lack of proper market research, but ultimately it can lead to results that are more lackluster than they expected. Without having properly considered all the options and opportunities, these companies were inflicted with tunnel vision, which is really a stubborn fixation on a single path or solution to reach a specific objective. This situation often leads to a short-sighted analysis of themselves, the market, and the competition. So how does tunnel vision actually happen? Like many aspects of bad practice, tunnel vision is something that can happen without you even realizing it, and it can lead to missed opportunities or improper implementation of certain plans. One way that tunnel vision can happen is if you've seen success doing things in a particular way, or if you've had particular success with a product, at which point you start thinking, well, obviously what I'm doing is working, so I really shouldn't change it, without really considering why you have this particular competitive advantage in the marketplace, and whether or not this competitive advantage will really sustain. Another way that tunnel vision can happen is if there's new trends happening in the marketplace, and you start thinking, I really got to get my business into this new trend as well, otherwise I'm really going to start falling behind, without really properly doing the analysis of why this trend is happening and whether or not this trend is really applicable to your business. Lastly, tunnel vision can happen if you see what the competitor is doing and you realize, hey, that's actually a pretty good idea, and you think that, well, I can probably do that to my own product as well. And so you just try and start reverse engineering what the competition has done without really considering and analyzing why the competition had to go to this direction and how they got to this direction as well. Now let's look at an example of a company that's exhibited tunnel vision and how tunnel vision has affected its performance in the marketplace. So today we're going to be looking at RIM. Now RIM's a company that identified well over a decade ago that business users were really looking for an easier and more mobile way to access their email and instant messaging. And because this was business information, of course, it needed to go through encrypted servers. Now, given that RIM was able to identify this early on, let's take a look at how RIM actually performed in the marketplace. Let's jump to 2007, where BlackBerry really started to hit its stride with the introduction of the BlackBerry Curve. Now, at the time, this was obviously the best BlackBerry that it's in the market, and despite having a very simple and sort of cartoony UI, it more than served its purpose fairly well to its business users. Now, moving forward a year, RIM came out with the BlackBerry Bold in 2008, which served to be a bigger, better version of the BlackBerry Curve, and even came at a premium, which led to a level of prestige when comparing mobile phones in the office. But the BlackBerry Bold continued to serve its core purposes fairly well. So one of RIM's greatest blunders was the introduction of the BlackBerry Storm in 2009, which was the first BlackBerry to contain a touchscreen. This was to compete directly with the iPhone, which originally came out in 2007 and was quickly gaining momentum in the market space, having its touchscreen UI and its fun applications. And especially with the introduction of the iPhone 3G in 2008, Apple was really putting a big dent in BlackBerry's stock price. So as a result, BlackBerry introduced the BlackBerry Storm, which they figured it works just like an iPhone with its touchscreen user interface, but still contain the reliable BlackBerry encryption along with emails and instant messaging. However, BlackBerry didn't quite execute this quite correctly, and they figured that just having a touchscreen was good enough. what they failed to realize is that to properly implement a touchscreen, there is a lot more engineering and science behind it. And so their touchscreen was not very usable. And BlackBerry at the same time didn't have quite the same number of fun applications, so that was basically a big failure of a product. Given how badly the BlackBerry Storm flopped, RIM decided to go back to its bread and butter by introducing the BlackBerry Bold 9700, which served to be a sturdier and faster version of the BlackBerry Bold that they had introduced a year ago. And RIM figured that they were bound to hit their stride once again because it was simply what they were doing before, but slightly better. But what they didn't really realize is that consumers had really changed what they were looking for, and even business users were starting to accept that using iPhones and other sorts of smartphones that weren't BlackBerries were acceptable in the workplace, so having a new BlackBerry didn't always serve the best purpose. The last example I want to go through is the introduction of the BlackBerry Playbook in 2011. Now, this was RIM's first tablet, which was meant to compete directly with the iPad that was originally introduced in 2010, and at the time was quite hot and revolutionary and was creating quite a market for itself. And especially with the introduction of the iPad 2 a year later, it was starting to create quite a dent in RIM's stock price once again. So as a result, RIM tried to push out their tablet as soon as possible as well, claiming that, it's probably just as good as an iPad, but with the same BlackBerry encryption as well. And on top of that, it had the flash compatibility to boot that Apple's iPad didn't quite have. Unfortunately, BlackBerry's Playbook wasn't quite as functional, and it didn't have as many applications, and it quite all around didn't work as well, and as a result, it was quite a flop. And less than 6 months later, stores were starting to sell it at a discount, just trying to liquidate the stock. So, what do you do to make sure that this doesn't happen to you? Well, the first thing to do is to make sure that you keep an open mind. That means even if you've already considered going down a certain route, you should continue to consider all your options and to continue brainstorming on all the possibilities available to you. RIM made the mistake of continuing to produce boring phones that didn't have a touchscreen and assumed that their customers continued to desire having a physical keyboard on their mobile device. The next thing is that if your competitor comes up with a great new idea, you shouldn't just copy them right away. You really need to consider how they came up with that great idea to begin with, and what nuances of that concept make it so attractive. Creating a great product may have required a lot more work and detail than you may think. RIM made the mistake of trying to imitate the iPhone's touchscreen concept. The product failed miserably as RIM had not put enough resources into its development, creating a product that had poor functionality and a lack of desirable applications for the users to download. Lastly, you should always be re-evaluating your strengths, weaknesses, and competitive advantage. Where you fit in these respects can change daily, especially with your competitors trying to figure you out at the same time. RIM had not learned that their weakness lied in their inability to innovate and implement touchscreen technology effectively. As a result, they produced the Playbook that lacked the highly anticipated functionality that could compete with the iPad, and RIM took another big hit to their stock price. Thank you for listening to our presentation on tunnel vision.